Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. This is Football at 4.
Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. And, of course, it is brought to you today by our friends at the Gallery Bar, booking games at Ocean Casino Resort all football season. Cheers your favorite drinks while cheering on your favorite team. Go to the Gallery and Ocean Casino Resort. Go for the win. For more info, visit theoceanac.com. Must be 21 or older to play. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Geoff Mosher is here. The Eagles are off, and, obviously they're kind of watching. So let's start with that, Geoff Mosher. If you're an Eagles fan this weekend, you're watching Cowboys-Buccaneers, and you're probably getting the winner of that. Now, we can discuss further if you think there's a possibility for others, but you're likely getting the winner of that game. Who are you rooting for this weekend? Are you Dallas next Sunday, or would you rather face Tom Brady and the Buccaneers?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty easy one. I think you're rooting for the Dallas Cowboys to just fall all over themselves, turn the ball over 3 or 4 times, and basically hand deliver the Tampa Bay Bucs a win for 2 reasons. One, because you don't want Tampa Bay winning like a 31-5 game because they were so great and Tom Brady woke up. You kind of want Dallas to lose this game. And 2, Tampa, in order to hang with the Eagles, in order to beat the Eagles, you really need a good offensive line. I mean, you need a good functional offense to begin with, but you really need to get that pass rush off of your quarterback. And that Tampa Bay offensive line has been beat up and decimated since the season opener, and since before that, I think, when they lost somebody in the preseason. And I just cannot see that Tampa Bay offensive line holding up against the Eagles' pass rush.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, is the fact that because we were wondering why the Buccaneers 8-9. What happened to this team? You got Mike Evans, you got Chris Godwin, you got Leonard Fournette, and, of course, you have Brady. Their defense is still pretty solid. So what was their problem this year? Why did they end up under 500 and so inconsistent? I think you just said it there, and that is why, if you're Philadelphia, look, I'm not sitting here suggesting I yearn to play Tom Brady, but if I have to choose a 45-year-old Brady with a banged-up offensive line or the Cowboys who, let's be honest, when the Cowboys play at their highest level, they have every bit of a conversation of winning this thing as anybody else does, right? I don't know that Tampa Bay has played. You remember the year when Philly lost to the Dolphins and you were doing the show and we would go back and forth about it? You know, they lost to the Dolphins. I said, yeah, but at their highest of highs, they proved they could beat a team like Green Bay that year. Tampa Bay hasn't done that. They have not shown that they could ratchet it up to a level where Dallas has. Dallas has gotten to a level where they've beaten Minnesota 40-3. They beat the Eagles a couple of weeks ago. So they have showed they have another level in them. I'm not sure Tampa does.
Not to mention the fact that the Cowboys have beaten the Eagles 8 times in the last 11 games between these two teams. Now, you could probably go find a bunch of games in those 11 where one team was resting starters, the other team was on the back of quarterback, and yada, yada. But the point is, the Cowboys are not afraid of the Eagles. I know that they lost here earlier with Cooper Rush, but their history says, at least recent history says, that they probably feel pretty confident that, if, like you just said, if they play their best game, they can beat the Eagles. Tampa, I mean, they to scratch and claw just to make the playoffs. And again, no offensive line. They can't run the ball at all because they don't have an offensive line. The Eagles don't allow big plays to begin with. So Mike Evans catches, 3 touchdowns last week over the top. Good luck doing that against the Eagles. Jonathan Yann's just not going to let you do that theoretically. I mean, philosophically. So he's going to make you go underneath, and then you're going to have to be able to run the ball well, and they just don't do that. So I just think it would be a very difficult matchup, even with Tom Brady. And for those who say, but it's Tom Brady, just like you said, Mike, this year, teams have beaten the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, so theoretically they've beaten Tom Brady. And I think the Panthers were one, and some other bad teams are in that mix. So they're just not as scary as people might think because of Tom Brady.
Well, the flip side of both of this is you just talked about like what John Gannon does, and you got to go over the top, and good luck in doing that. Many people out there listening are saying, yeah, well, Brady's going to go 30 for 30, picking them apart underneath the whole entire game. Most people would say, what's John Gannon's defense going to look like against a Tom Brady or against a Dak Prescott? We already saw Dak have probably his best game of the season against John Gannon's defense. So does that play, Tom Brady against Gannon's defense? He saw it last year, carved it up, and if he gets it again, what would he do to it a second time?
Well, again, since we're comparing one versus the other, Dak Prescott looked like Tom Brady the last time these two teams played each other, Eagles and Cowboys. So I'd rather go face the Tom Brady who has a worse offensive line and worse weapons. And yes, Tom Brady is probably going to pick apart the Eagles defense if they play underneath and nickel and dime the ball down the field. But at the end of the day, he's going to have to throw the ball in the end zone for a touchdown a couple of times, score some points to do that. And then, of course, run the ball well as well. And that I don't see happening.
Yeah. We talked a lot this week about the opening matchup. Tampa won that game 19-3 and quite dominated that game, really. I mean, that was the lowest output in total. So I don't know how much stock you put in that game, but when you look at this game on the surface on this Wednesday, which way you leaning early on this one?
I'm leaning toward the Cowboys. I mean, I know it's very, very difficult to say that given how they performed against Washington in the season finale. And yes, what you said about the season opener, but I'm going to sort of play off the same philosophy that the Cowboys, one thing they do well is they can throw some pass rushers at you. And the one thing that Tampa Bay has had trouble with is, defensive teams that can attack them and hold them down and hit up the quarterback a little bit. So, and then they're a little banged up on defense too, Mike. So listen, it wouldn't shock me if the Cowboys lost. And like I said in my opening statement, they could turn the ball over 3 or 4 times just because that's what the Cowboys have been doing anyway, and hand deliver it to Tampa Bay. But I do think that they're a more talented team, and they are equipped to win this game.
Just some numbers for the people out there. 76 rushing yards this season a game for Tampa Bay. It's the fewest in the NFL and the second fewest in NFL history by any playoff team. I mean, you're talking about a historically bad rushing the football team. They're 18 points a game. It's the second worst by any playoff team in the last 15 years. The worst was the 2016 Houston Texans. You remember that juggernaut? So the Buccaneers right now are historically bad as a playoff team. So keep an eye on that. Jeff, I want to get some thoughts on Philadelphia, where they stand right now. And let's look at Jalen Hurts. He was hurt. He played. He didn't play his greatest game, but he got the job done. But what are we seeing from Hurts now? Hearing Sirianni yesterday talking about how sore he is, do we think that Jalen is probably more banged up going into this game in 2 weeks than maybe we thought?
Well, I do think Nick Sirianni was being honest, but also sort of letting everybody know how hard that was for Jalen Hurts to go out there, because obviously aesthetically it didn't look great. There were some good throws, but there were also some not good throws and a bad interception. And I think Nick Sirianni wanted the public to know that this man was hurting, and that, in almost kind of a reverse psychology way. So the fans are like, oh, I get it. That's why the play wasn't as good. Because Nick normally doesn't come out and discuss injuries and the extent that someone is hurting or suffering through an injury. But he did have an injury, Mike, that was, as we understood it, sort of between a 1 and a 2 level sprain. So you can say anywhere from 3 weeks, 6 weeks. Don't forget the collarbone was part of the injury as well. So, and he was only about 3 into it. So, I mean, it was natural to expect it. He's going to be sore the next day too. I think 2 weeks later, though, when he plays his divisional game for the Eagles, you would naturally expect that he's going to be stronger and healthier. Will he be 100%? I don't know. We'll have to see. But he will have much more time to A, recover, and B, get his timing and rhythm back in practice with the guys. I wouldn't be surprised if he's throwing to the guys this week, even though they're theoretically off.
Yeah. As we know, the injuries are not black and white. We don't know the extent of what he's feeling, where he is, and where he's going to feel 2 weeks from now. Think about that. 2 weeks from now, you could feel way different than you feel today.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at the difference between the day after the Bears game and Sunday. I mean, he was able to throw the ball against the Giants, and he was able to do things that he couldn't do the week before. Yeah. So you're right. 2 weeks can make a big difference.
Big difference. Geoff Mosher, InsideTheBirds.com, the Inside the Birds podcast. Let's look at Jack Driscoll and the right tackle position and how he played in that spot. We think Lane Johnson's going to go, right? I mean, the injury's there. But if Lane Johnson plays and then has to leave the game, does Jack Driscoll go back into that spot, or do we think they reevaluate that?
I think you have to, Mike. And then the shame of it, it's a shame for the Eagles. It's a shame for Lane Johnson. I do think if Lane was out for the year and they knew it and he wasn't going to try to gut it out, then they probably would have given serious consideration to moving Jordan Mailata to right tackle and playing Andre Dillard at left tackle, because then you can practice that way. You can game plan that way. This is what your lineup is. Nobody else has to move. But because Lane is going to try to gut it out, and we'll see how long he can last, it sort of left Jeff Stoutland and the coaching staff really no other option but to put Jack Driscoll there. Because what you don't want to do is take Jordan Mailata, play him at right tackle against the Giants, have Andre Dillard play left tackle. Then you start practicing with Mailata back at left tackle and get Lane in there at right tackle, or play the first game. Then Lane, if he gets hurt or re-aggravates it, makes it worse, or can't go through, then all of a sudden you're jockeying him back again. You can't do that. You've got to be able to, especially in the playoffs, practice and game plan for your opponent, knowing to the best you can what your starting five is going to look like. Now, obviously, you get an in-game injury, you can't play, and you got to do what you got to do, but you've got to be able to get your best reps in practice with the people that you're going to go start the game with. So obviously, if they think that Lane Johnson's going to give it a go and he's going to play right tackle, they're not going to want to move Jordan Mailata over there. So they're going to have to put Jack Driscoll there. And you can make a very strong and sound argument that is not their best starting five, but it's a conundrum for the team, and I don't know what else they could do.
All right, Jeff, let's look at the slot and Avonte Maddox. We don't think he's going to play, but what do the Eagles do now with Chauncey Gardner-Johnson back? We got to see a full game with him, so what do we know about what they might do if Maddox cannot go, which we don't think he will be able to?
Right, so if Sunday was a tell against the Giants, what we saw was C.J. Gardner-Johnson playing safety, but only in base formations. And we know that, this is a primarily nickel and sub-package team. And when that happened against the Giants, Gardner-Johnson moved to the slot, and then they brought Reed Blankenship in to play safety. So basically what they did was get C.J. Gardner-Johnson on 100% of the time, and then get Blankenship on the field instead of Josiah Scott when they were in nickel or dime or sub-packages. Understandable. We all know why. Even when they won games with CJ out, they were picking on the slot. So this is what looks like is going to be their move. I would say my only concern of that, and it's a pretty big one, is that when you're playing the slot in this defense as a defender, you're doing a lot of man coverage. And when you're in a lot of man coverage, you're running with receivers. Your back is often to the quarterback, as man is. When you're playing safety, as CJ was first half of the year before he got hurt, your eyes are on the quarterback. You are seeing where the ball is going. You're able to jump routes. You're able to be opportunistic. He was about as opportunistic as anyone in the league, Mike. He was leading the NFL in interceptions. And so now you're kind of taking him out of that spot to strengthen your nickel. But I would argue that I think during the first half of the year, the Eagles were what they were. They were as dominant as they were for a lot of reasons. But number one in my mind was that they were far and ahead of everybody else in takeaways and turnover ratio. And CJ was a big part of that from the safety position. If you're in the playoffs, I think turnovers become that much more important. If you're putting CJ Gardner-Johnson 66% of the time in the slot where it's tougher to get those turnovers because you're back to the quarterback all the time, I'm sort of interested to see if that's really the best thing for this defense.
Yeah, and I want to get your thoughts on Chauncey Gardner-Johnson and what he brought and, what he adds to this defense and what now that he's back, what this defense was kind of missing without him.
Well, I mean, I think, for number one was that playmaking. I mean, the Eagles have had I believe the Eagles have had 2 interceptions since he got hurt. One was by Reed Blankenship against the Packers, and the other one, I believe, was Josiah Scott 2 weeks ago. So now you're taking Josiah Scott off the field, right? And deservedly so. I'm not really arguing that point. But they're not nearly the turnover, flip the field type team that they were when CJ was healthy and playing safety. And I think that's the biggest impact that they missed. And I would argue that even if you kept Josiah Scott at slot and played CJ Gardner at safety, sure, they're still going to try to pick on Josiah Scott, but I think you can masquerade that and win games as long as you have CJ out there, flipping the field for you and producing turnovers at a high rate.
Yeah, the way that I kind of broke it down, Moshe, is Blankenship didn't cost you games. He just didn't help you win any games. And that's what Chauncey Gardner-Johnson does. He helps you win games because he gets the interception. He makes that big play. Blankenship didn't do anything wrong. He's just not a reason why you're winning the game.
No, I mean, he's a smart kid. He's puts himself in the right position. He's head and shoulders above most rookie free agents, and we saw that as early as first few weeks of training camp. So it's not a surprise that he's been able to take advantage of the opportunity. Even as a deep safety, he doesn't kill you. There are sometimes on over routes, Mike, a guy catches the ball over the middle and sort of turns upfield and Reed, again, not being the greatest athlete, he's then got to either catch him or take the perfect angle to be able to get him. Then you saw the other day, he kind of got trucked by Davis Webb there at the goal line. So you're going to have to take some of the hits when he's there, but he's not going to kill you. Like you said, he's not going to, he hasn't yet. When you get into the playoffs, you go up against maybe a Kyle Shanahan coach team, might be a different story there. I'm sure that's the guy that you draw the circle around when you're a good offensive coordinator or coach and try to exploit, and maybe there are opportunities to do that. But again, like we were all saying, Josiah Scott was hurting you, and people were doing the same thing. They were picking on him very often in games.
We're talking with Geoff Mosher, Football at 4 from InsideTheBirds.com. Obviously, this team has this whole week here to kind of get themselves healthy and get themselves going. The one question, I guess, moving forward here, you have Hurts. He's going to play, obviously, but what level is he going to be? Lane Johnson going to try to play. Avonte Maddox, we're not sure. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson is back. Josh Sweat would be the other guy. Do we anticipate that Sweat is back and playing full reps as if nothing happened here?
Well, I mean, I believe he will be back and playing, yes. I think as long as he's healthy and checks out, he'll start. Nick Sirianni was saying that he was even lobbying to try to play against the Giants. So I imagine that means he's felt like he was good enough to go. And now he's got 2 more weeks. The big ones are Maddox and Johnson. We talked about Lane, and as I've said many times, there are a lot of people I spoke to, athletes and coaches who have had this injury that he has, and they express a degree of skepticism that he'll be able to play an entire game or make it through. Now, Maddox is interesting. He's as Adam Kaplan reported on our podcast, he's in a walking boot, but not on crutches. So that's actually a good sign. And it was a good sign that they didn't put him on IR before the Saints game, because you have to miss 4 games. And so he would have missed Saints, Giants as 2, the divisional round, and a conference championship. So he would have if he went on IR unless the Eagles made the Super Bowl. So they didn't put him on IR. So maybe there's some degree of optimism there that he can return for, if not the conference championship, maybe the divisional round. But I think that's not something that right now they'll be able to tell. We have to see on how the next week or so goes for him in his recovery.
All right, Geoff Mosher, of course, Football at 4 here. The Inside the Birds podcast, the Inside the Birds pregame show on their social media channels, and they'll have pregame coverage of Eagles, and we'll find out, and we'll have that for you here on Football at 4. Keep it locked tomorrow. Andrew will take a look at the matchups in the wild card round, and then all the latest from Adam on Friday as we get into Super Wild Card Weekend. Geoff Mosher, always a pleasure, my friend.
All right, Mike, thanks.